Hi, I am the lady Miss VaginaJenkins, and it is time for queer astrology. So this week's video is all about retrograde planets, both retrograde planets that are transiting in the sky and retrograde planets in your birth chart. What do they mean? What are they about? Why are they doing this to us? Let's talk about it. The idea for this video comes from YouTube subscriber Live and Let Livia, who was asking about the Neptune retrograde. We just experienced a retrograde in Neptune, I think that started in June and just ended in December. And they were asking about, how that affected them, or just people just generally speaking, and how it would affect them specifically because they have a natal Neptune retrograde. Lord, say that 3 times fast. And so, yeah, we got to talking about that in the comments, and I got to thinking about it, and I thought, yeah, I want to make a whole video about retrograde planets and what they mean and how they affect us. So let's talk about it. So I want to talk about what a planet being in retrograde means. I want to talk about what planets actually do go retrograde and for how long. And I want to talk about how planetary retrogrades in transit might affect us, as well as planetary retrogrades in our own personal natal charts. By the way, I'm trying something different with my lighting setup, something that's a little bit more accessible for me. Let me know if you notice any difference in terms of being better or worse, or if you don't notice any difference at all. I'm just curious about what people experience in terms of the way that I set up my filming setup. I'm trying all the time to make it better, Anywho, thank you. So first and foremost, what does a planet being retrograde mean? So from the perspective of us looking at the sky from the planet Earth, sometimes it looks like planets are going forward, the direction that we normally see them in. And by normally, I mean the majority of the time when we look up at the sky at them. And then sometimes, for short periods of time, it looks like those planets are going backwards in the sky. And it's all about our perspective. Are these planets actually going backwards? Not at all. But from our perspective, it looks like they are moving backwards. And so that is a planetary retrograde. So which of the things that we look at in the sky actually go retrograde? First and foremost, the sun and the moon are never retrograde, in that we are in a satellite relationship with both of those luminaries. We are a satellite of the sun, and the moon is our satellite. Some of the other placements that we will look at in a chart are the 4 angles: the ascending, the descendant, the IC, the MC. Those will never be retrograde in a chart. And the north and south node are actually always going retrograde. So in 2022, we had the north node in Taurus, and now we have the north node in Aries. Those always move backwards. Generally speaking, when I think of a retrograde planet, I think of a couple of different things. Specifically when I'm thinking about specifically when I'm thinking about planets that are transiting and in retrograde. So I think about how a planet has a task that it's supposed to do, and how when it's moving backwards, it might not be so efficient at doing that task. Another thing that I think about is how when a planet is moving backwards, it may be a time for us to even revisit the lessons and intentions of that planet. So for example, let's start out by looking at Mercury retrograde. Mercury is the planet of communication, ideas, how we think, like our thought processes. The written word, generally speaking, short-term travel or local travel. And so that is the job of Mercury. That is all the things that it's in charge of. When it's moving backwards, it might not be so efficient at doing those things. There may be communication snafus. There may be ideas that are lost or reconsidered. There may be difficulties with travel plans that fall through. And so all of those things might be affected under a Mercury retrograde. And what if, instead of just trying to plow forward and push through in the face of all this difficulty, we actually took the time to sit with those ideas, communications, data, local travel, all of those Mercury sort of things, and sat with what it would be like to reimagine, reconsider, reevaluate. All of the RE words is what I think about when I think about planets going retrograde. So let's reevaluate communications, letters that we've sent out, emails that we've sent out, contracts that we've made. This is not a time for signing new contracts. This is a time to be super intentional about communications that we send out and double check everything that we have written. This is a really good time to not be making travel plans, instead to just like maybe think about future travels that we would like to have and start doing plans around that, and taking in the energy of reevaluation to really make it the most perfect local travel plan that we could possibly come up with. So that is Mercury as a transit. And then when I think about Mercury in a person's natal chart, or any chart for that matter, I don't think you're necessarily doomed to poor communication or not being able to think clearly, but I think that it is an opportunity to develop your own unique relationship to those mercurial ideas. For example, when I've had clients that had a natal Mercury retrograde in their chart, typically they are people that have to think about slowing things down. This is not, oh, I'll get you an email back in 5 minutes response time. This is a person that knows that they need to sleep on their communications and really consider them and think them through. This could be the experience of like having racing thoughts or too many thoughts, and also understanding that you have to allow those thoughts to race, to move, and that is part of your process, but that happens internally, and what you actually do externally in terms of acting on those thoughts is very considered, very measured. So that's Mercury retrograde. Now let's look at Mars retrograde. So when I think about Mars's tasks and responsibilities, I think about passion, drive, ambition, the things that we want to pursue in life. And so when I think about Mars being retrograde, I think about an opportunity to reimagine, reconsider, revisit the things that we say that we are passionate about, to reevaluate our relationship to what ambitions we have and what we are moving towards. I also think of Mars as a planet of like quick movement and reactivity. And so when the transiting Mars is in retrograde, I think about it as being an opportunity to slow down. When I think about Mars being retrograde in a natal chart, I wonder about the experience of having decreased ambition, drive, or maybe even bodily energy, generally speaking. I also wonder about the experience of having your own unique relationship to ambition. If there are people around you that say that it should be your ambition to do this under capitalism, that you must advance your career in this particular way. I think about natal Mars retrograde people forging their own way. Of course, a reminder that all of this also depends on what sign your natal Mars retrograde is in. A natal Mars retrograde in Aries is going to be a completely different experience from a natal Mars retrograde in Libra, for example. So all of these things sort of go into it. Also a reminder about what sign the planet is in. Is it in its sign of rulership? Is it in its sign of exaltation, in its sign of detriment or fall? Is it in an element like fire, air, earth, or water? Or is it doing things in a cardinal, fixed, or mutable way? These are all things that are part of the picture that make up how you interpret your natal planets. And then we come to Venus, one of my favorite planets. So when I think about what the role of Venus is, I think about, yes, romantic relationships, but more so values. I think about creativity. I do think about the role of beauty and art in our lives, and what we literally attract. Yes, the attraction of being like beautiful by whatever standards, but also manifestation, what we bring to us by being in our Venus energy. And transiting Venus is in retrograde. What might we experience in terms of reevaluating those things? Will we change the ways in which we approach creativity? Will we have new ideas about what it means to attract and be attractive? Will we consider new artistic modes and opportunities? When I also think of Venus, I also think about the signs that it rules, Taurus and Libra. So tangible beauty and diplomatic and charming, beautiful communications, how we might reconsider those things under a Venus retrograde. When I think about Venus being retrograde in the natal chart, I don't think first and foremost, I don't think about a person who will never ever find romantic love. I think I have read that before, and I remember reading it and thinking that is so ugly. That is not at all what I think Venus retrograde is about in the natal chart. I think that, like I said before, it's about forming your own unique relationship to attraction, romantic relationships, how you do creativity, what you find beautiful. And I have had a couple of clients that had natal Venus retrograde in their chart, and they were really interesting and creative artists that had developed their own sense of style, creativity based on that retrograde natal planet. It could mean being slower around these things, slower to discover your own creativity or find your mode of creativity. It could be slower to identify your unique values and your own way of relating to your values and what you find most important in your life. But yeah, it is not necessarily being doomed to not have romantic relationship and romantic connection. That's not what Venus retrograde in the natal chart is about at all. And I just want to underline that. Stop the fear mongering, people. Now let's look at Jupiter. So Jupiter's my favorite planet. I'm a Sagittarius rising ruled by Jupiter, so of course. But yeah, when I think about Jupiter, I think about expanding things, expanding our mental landscape and our thought paradigms and belief systems, maybe even expanding our bodies. I have my natal Jupiter is placed in the 6th house of health and body, and I have an expansive body and an expansive mindset. But yeah, I think about wherever Jupiter is in your chart as the place that has the most potential to grow and expand infinitely over time. And right now we are experiencing a transiting Jupiter retrograde. And so I'm curious, feel free to comment below. Have you been having experiences where you are reconsidering your belief systems, philosophies, if you are reconsidering your relationship to abundance, however you define that? Yeah, obviously like financial abundance, but how you experience abundance of anything in the world. Yeah, I personally am definitely experiencing a crisis, but that's not exactly the word. It's not so dramatic, but maybe I'll say more of a backsliding in terms of my personal philosophies and belief systems, especially as it relates to abundance. And it's been difficult. And also, I am grateful for the opportunity to reconsider, to reevaluate, to reimagine these things. So I'll say that. And then when I think about Jupiter in the natal chart, I think about what it would be like to gently explore any limiting beliefs that you might have, because that's the primary thing that comes to mind when I think about Jupiter being retrograde in one's natal chart, or any chart, or any chart for that matter. What would it be like to experience this kind of backsliding, lack of faith, a feeling of being constricted instead of expanding? What is it like to reconcile that and form your own unique relationship to forging abundance and expansion in your life? And let's look at Saturn retrograde, both transiting and your natal chart. So when I think about what Saturn means, I think about, the first thing that comes to mind is hard work over time. When I think of Saturn, I think about discipline, boundaries. Yeah, they say that Saturn is a sort of taskmaster sort of energy. And so yeah, being on task, standing on business, being about your responsibilities in the world. And then when Saturn is retrograde, what is the experience of reconsidering what you feel responsible to, reconsidering your boundaries, or maybe even having difficulty with authority or boundaries, or being able to complete tasks that feel significant to you. Yeah, that is the sort of experience that I'm thinking about when I think about Saturn being retrograde, transiting in the sky. And then what does it mean to have Saturn retrograde in the birth chart? Is there a difficulty with boundaries? Is there a difficulty with staying on task, completing tasks, being about your business? Are there issues with authority? I will also share that I have a natal Saturn retrograde, and yes to issues with authority, but I think sometimes there's part of a thing with retrograde planets in our charts where we can kind of internalize the lessons of the planet. And I find this particularly strong with Saturn. And so you become your own internal taskmaster. And my God, I'm laughing because if I set my mind to something, I'm gonna make a work plan. I'm gonna stick to it. I'm gonna do it. But then it's when I'm working with other people that I realize, wow, you are really strict on yourself, babe. You gotta calm down. You gotta be nicer. So yeah, I've had difficulty with boundaries with others, but I have not had a difficulty with boundaries with myself. I will also note that when this was true of my experience, and I've had a number of clients that had Saturn retrograde in their natal charts, and that internalizing thing has been so true that when it came to their Saturn returns, a Saturn return is a time when we get to reassess our commitments, I'll say. And so you have committed to a course of action, and then you get to be 28, 30, and then you have your Saturn return, and Saturn says, okay, so this is the task that you have committed to. This is the task and work that you were assigned. How are you doing with it? Oh, you are distracted. Let's remove those distractions. And then people may experience a bit of chaos, a bit of upheaval, you know, as some of those things are removed from your life. But I have noticed that people that have natal Saturn in their chart, retrograde in their chart, often experience easier, for lack of a better word, Saturn returns, because they are their own internal taskmaster who's always keeping them on track. It can mean, you know, some issues, like I said, with like boundaries and authority and all that good stuff. But in terms of like being on task, oh, it can't be beat. I have to say. Really proud of my natal Saturn retrograde. So shout out to all my Saturn retrograde babes. You're doing fine. You're doing fine. Just maybe don't be so hard on yourself, or let other people be hard on you either. Let's look at Uranus. So when I think about Uranus in a chart, both transiting or in a natal chart, or other charts, I keep saying natal chart, but there's so many charts, you know, we've talked about this over and over again. But yeah, when I think about Uranus, generally speaking, I just think about rebellion and innovation. Maybe they are two sides of the same coin. Recognizing what structures exist and then deciding to rebel against them or to innovate them. When I think about the transiting Uranus being retrograde, I think about an opportunity for us to revisit the ways in which we have rebelled or been innovative. I think about it as an opportunity for us to reimagine, revisit the ways in which we approach originality. I also very much think of it as an opportunity to revisit, reimagine, recraft our own personal liberatory practices. What makes you feel unfettered and free? And then when I see Uranus retrograde in a birth chart, I think about the experience of having difficulty expressing your originality, expressing your uniqueness, or even feeling comfortable in your weirdness. Maybe even the experience of trying to hide your weirdness and prioritize conformity or adherence to some sort of perceived social norms. Again, I want to highlight that this really depends on what sign, what house you find your natal Uranus. The reason why I say that is because I cannot imagine Uranus in Aquarius retrograde being anything other than a weirdo. I think in that case it might be slow to recognize that you're a weirdo. So yeah, just keeping in mind that where it's at, what sign it's in, elements, modes, all of those things matter too. Just underlining that part again. And you know, shout out weirdos, weirdo gang. I love me some weirdos. And we come to Neptune, which was what inspired this whole video to start with. Again, shout out to Liv and Let Livia, who asked the question about Neptune retrogrades. And so yeah, we just experienced a Neptune retrograde, and I'm curious about folks' experiences. Did you note from June to December any of the things that I'm about to talk about? So when I think about Neptune, I think about the role and importance of dreaming, of being delusional, of hoping, of spirit, not necessarily religiosity. I think about that, and like being in the church, I think about that more when I think about Saturn, because that's such a clear structure, but connecting to something that makes you feel, I mean, connected to something that is bigger than ourselves, I'll say. And also art, in the same way that Venus has to do with art and creativity, but like a higher octave of that. Neptune is such an important planet, and I hate that people shit on it as being, oh, the planet of illusions and lies. Yes, that's part of it, but so much of keeping hope alive is about dreaming, and that's so valuable, important to me, I'll say. And so when I think about Neptune being in retrograde, I think about the veil being lifted, maybe even being ripped away, things getting really, really, really real, things getting really, really real in whatever particular house you find your Neptune in. And so Liv and Let Livia has their Neptune in the 11th house. And so I was wondering about the experience of their friend groups, social groups, if there was a sudden realization that, oh no, this isn't as good for me as I thought it might be, or some other like huge revelation. There's just when I think about Neptune being in retrograde, I think about just revelations and shit getting really, really real. Also, the diminished capacity to dream, hope, and keep that kind of spiritual connection alive that helps us feel like we can sustain ourselves in our forward movement. When I think about Neptune being retrograde in a person's natal chart, I wonder about the experience of having a difficulty dreaming. And then I would look specifically for their Saturn placement to understand what their relationship to work is. I think that there is a connection, and I haven't figured it out entirely, but I think that there's a connection between Saturn and Neptune. But yeah, I would be curious about the experience of having a natal Neptune retrograde and what your relationship to dreaming, hope, and feeling hopeful might be. I would be curious about if there's been difficulty in one's creative realm, both in finding your particular mode of creativity, or maybe even finding it difficult to engage in creativity, period. And then I would also be curious about one's relationship to spirit. If that has been something that has been slow to form in your life, or if it's just been difficult to grasp and connect to that realm, generally speaking. And lastly, we come to Pluto. When I think about Pluto in the chart, I think about so many cool things that we don't like to talk about. Things like our shadow self, our relationship to power, the way we desire power, and also the ways in which we react to systems of power. I also think about the ways in which we find ourselves transformed dramatically over the course of our lifetime, and how sometimes, a lot of times, that transformation doesn't just come about because we would like to change, but because of some form of disturbance, I'll say. When I think about Pluto being in retrograde, in terms of transiting Pluto being in retrograde, I think a lot about secrets coming to the surface, like things that have been in the depths in some kind of way being unearthed. So I think about maybe revisiting your shadow work. I think about maybe even exposing some secrets. I think also about the opportunity to reconsider, revisit our relationship to power, and also what a perfect time it is to revisit our notions of personal power, what makes us feel empowered and strong enough to do all of the Saturn things in the world, or dream all the Neptune things in the world. And when I think about Pluto being retrograde in one's natal chart, I wonder about having a unique relationship to personal power and what it might be like to internalize some of those Pluto things, particularly around transformation and one's personal power. I would be curious about, I can't think of any client that I've had that had a Pluto retrograde, but I would be really curious about the relationship to secrets. Whether there is a unique relationship to secrets, particularly maybe savoring them and being a keeper of secrets. Yeah, that's what I don't know. I'm really curious about that Pluto retrograde experience. Yeah, if you have Pluto retrograde in your chart, let me know about that. And tell me what house and sign it's in too. I mean, if you want to share. You probably don't, because Pluto is about secrets. But if you do, I would be really grateful to hear that. So yeah. That is my whole spiel about all of the planets. I think I forgot to say that no, did I? I can't remember. I'll just say it again. That we are starting a Mercury retrograde today as this video is released. It is Mercury retrograde is starting at 8 degrees of Capricorn, and over the next few weeks it will finish out moving backwards through Capricorn and into Sagittarius. So, you know, mind your communication as it relates to the Capricorn and Sagittarius parts of your chart. For example, for me, that is the second house and the first house. So how I make money, my values, as well as my own personal identity. So yeah, I'm going to be really careful with my business communications. I'm going to be reconsidering some of the ways in which I handle my business. Maybe reevaluating some of this YouTube content. So yeah, we shall see how that works out. It'll be great. It's an amazing opportunity, as always. Anyway, that's it. That's the video. I hope that it helped. I'm curious if you learned anything new, or if you have anything that you want to share with me, like your personal placements. And as always, I just thank you so much for watching, and thank you for making time for queer astrology. Don't fear the retrogrades.